All right, so I guess I'll just briefly kind of talk about this tactic. So it's called the inside out tactic, and basically what it is a recognition that we all know certain things on the inside because we were made in God's image, right? This guy Francis Schaeffer from back in the 70s was quoted with saying, or coining this term called the mannishness of man, right? That we have this, there's a difference between man and non-man. Right? And we all recognize, and kind of the way that I kind of showed that kind of explicitly last week is if you had, I don't know, a frog or a chicken and a human child, like a 4-year-old child, and you were like, okay, I'm going to kill one of these things. Which one should I kill? No one is going to select the 4-year-old child, right? Because we all know that children, or humans, have value that toads do not. Right, and so it's kind of this. It's just an example of our knowing on the inside coming out. Right, there's many different variations of that. Morality, for example, when we make a moral stance or we have a moral claim, we are assuming that God exists. Because you cannot get morality or at least not transcendent morality. You can get like the government saying that something is moral or immoral, but of course, if the government changes, then what higher authority can you appeal to? You can't. Right? And so that's kind of why our Declaration of Independence is grounded in the transcendent creator, because if you can't ground it in that, and the highest authority you can ground to then is a king, then the king can say, well, we're not going to do that anymore, we're going to change that. And so that's kind of why they grounded it in the creator. And so that goes for morality as well. You can't get real morality, objective morality, unless there is a God. And so anytime that you have an atheist or someone like that making a moral claim that this is bad or this is good, they're assuming, even though they don't recognize it, that there is a transcendent being that's making it so, right? And so it's called the inside coming out. That's kind of the way that Greg Koukl puts it in his book, right? And so we'll just this is the last slide I ended off last week. And if you have any questions, just, feel free, because we're kind of midway through it, sort of. So if something doesn't make sense, just ask a question, try to hash it out for you. So Carl Sagan said this, he says that we find ourselves in bottomless freefall, lost in great darkness, and there's no one to send the search party, right? And this would be what you would have to believe if there were no God, right? Because we would just be kind of floating aimlessly. There wouldn't be any real trajectory to life. There's no goal to anything. It's just we're all just here doing stuff. There's no real goal to any of it. And so that's the kind of that second line there. This is true in a world without God, bleak nothingism. So that's in the late 19th century, late 1800s, this philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was kind of noting that, is just that if atheism is lived out to its fullest extent, what you end up with is this thing called nihilism, which is just nothingism, basically. There's no point to doing anything, and nothing has any real transcendent or ultimate purpose. We can make up our own little purposes as we go along. Oh, I want to have a family, but I think when you can kind of really see how that's, hey, look who's here, welcome. Feel free to chime in on nothingism or nihilism. We're going over a cheery subject today. Where did I leave off? Yeah, so this nothingism idea, or this, where I kind of, I think it's easiest to see that distinction is where if we're just on a rock that's eventually going to explode one day, and there really is no ultimate purpose to anything, well, why do anything then? I mean, it's just, if it's all just going to explode, if we're just going to be worm food in the end, what is the difference between, becoming a CEO or a bum? I mean, they both result in the same thing in a matter of 100 years, right? And there really is no point in achieving one versus not achieving anything. And the key to the inside-out tactic is that no one actually believes this. No one actually believes their life has absolutely no purpose, or that they have no value, or that there is no morality. People always operate as though those things are, that there is morality and that there is purpose and all of that. And so another quote that we have here is Bill Nye, which really made me sad because Bill Nye was part of my childhood. But it says that we are on a speck, orbiting a speck among other specks. And it just kind of highlighting, the atheist perspective of insignificance. Welcome. So it's just kind of like highlighting that there is no significance to anything here on Earth in the absence of God. Okay. So let's kind of move on to the next slide. So Paul, you know, in Romans 1:19, you came in the right. This is the right session for you. Yeah, right. All right, so Romans 1:19 says, that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them, right? And this is kind of a biblical phrasing of the inside-out tactic, right? What we know on the inside was made evident to us, for God made it evident to them, right? That it's we can see it on the outside and we know it on the inside, right? And what we know on the inside eventually comes out because it's how we live our lives, right? We are kind of, I think it was from last week that we talked about how we are made in God's image, and because we are made in God's image, there are certain aspects about God that are imprinted on us, right? And so the profound truths that we know on the inside always reveal themselves on the outside. Okay. So we're going to pause and reflect on this. So can we think of a time when someone has borrowed from our worldview to make a point actually against our worldview? And if we have trouble with that one, we can do the second one too. So have we ever seen a non-Christian, or can we think of maybe some examples? Maybe we didn't experience this in real life, but even in the media or just in movies or something like that, have we ever seen a non-Christian make a statement that is inconsistent with the worldview that they embrace? So let's just see if we can pause and reflect, and we can think of maybe a time where we've either witnessed this directly or indirectly, you know, in the news or something like that. So.
The second one.
Okay.
This one hurts me very much.
Okay.
Pro-choice people who will argue vehemently that an unborn child is not human, not anything, it's a clump of cells. They'll be nasty about it, and then you'll see them be pregnant, and they will name the child or mourn a miscarriage or have a baby shower and do all these things, which are, you know, all of that is natural if you believe it's a human being.
Yeah.
But they'll argue with you vehemently it's not a human being, but when they have one, I'm like, why are you naming it?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Before it's born, you're screaming at me that you should be able to kill it.
Yeah.
Yet you give it a name.
Yeah, it's like the value thing, right? So that humans have value. Well, it has value when I want it to have value. That's basically kind of the approach that they're taking.
Know it when it's there a lot of times.
Yes. Yeah, they do know that it has value, and they can't help but show that it does when it's their own. When it's someone else's and they're less invested, they'll say, well, it doesn't matter. But I think we can see how deranged that really is, to say that humans have value when I want them to. That's a good one. Yeah. Anyone got any other ones maybe that they can think of? Paul's holding back.
I am holding back.
Yeah. Why don't you go for it, Paul?
The first one is a little tricky because what is a worldview is kind of a question that we don't know if we put into words. But almost anything that we believe can be kind of encompassed in a worldview. So the one that I think of when someone makes something like what number one up there is a quote from C.S. Lewis. It's not really a quote, but it is like a story he tells, where the entire world, and people from the time of Ptolemy, are going back like thousands of years now, well, not 2,000 years, believed that compared to the size of the sun, the earth must be nothing shorter than a speck. And Christianity knew this. Like, Christianity completely knew this. There was no problem. There was no issue with the worldview. Christians were able to accomplish it. And then suddenly, in like the 1900s, it became, and the early 2000s, it became, we're so insignificant and small, how could God care about us? It very quickly changed. How did something that was understood by everyone suddenly be used as it was suddenly set up as an argument against Christianity?
Interesting. Okay. Huh. So I'm just trying to, so they borrowed from our worldview. Okay, I see what you're saying. So they borrowed from our worldview that we already kind of knew that the earth was small and relative, I guess, not insignificant in size, I guess.
And that's where the trick of the mind happened. Christianity knew that we were small.
Right.
But it didn't attribute importance to size.
Right.
Whereas through the worldview of the trick of the mind, suddenly because we were small, we were insignificant in the scope of the universe.
Right. And also in value and importance and all of that. It's interesting. Wow, that's a little interesting sleight of hand right there.
C.S. Lewis made fun of it a little bit further. It's almost saying that a person who is 5'4" is not as important as someone who is 5'6", which we all know to be manifest nonsense.
Right.
Just nonsense. It's just because of the scope that we're talking about, the difference between the sun and the earth, through our own mental sleight of hand.
Right.
We treat it as we treat it as completely different questions when it is the same thing.
Interesting. That's kind of out of left field. I definitely wouldn't have thought of that one. Yeah, thank you. There we go.
I was so smart that I almost got up to scratch that top corner, thinking it was a speck of dust, and I now realized it's the mouse. I was staring at it for like 3 minutes. It would be nuts. And then as I leaned forward to start talking, I'm like, oh, I'm glad I did. Such a smart guy.
That's funny. Yeah, kind of the one that I had written up here was kind of like the whole social justice warrior thing. Particularly when it comes to subjects that Christians would disagree with, right? The LGBT agenda, for example, right, where they use morality against Christians when you can't get morality without the objective morality of Christianity, right? So that's kind of the first one that I thought of with that. They chant that, oh, you're such bigots and you're so hateful against, the LGBT community, so they're assuming that it's wrong to take a moral stance against, a sin, basically, because that's objectively how that would be defined. So they're kind of just stealing from our own worldview and using it against our worldview in that way. And that can be used. And there's a whole slew of different things that people do that with the social justice warrior movement, because most of them are neo-Marxists, right? So neo-Marxists. That presumes that you were an atheist, right? If you're taking that view, am I correct on that?
Yeah. And you see that in the most obvious places I would see would be racism and slavery. And it's like Christians, how could you were the worst purveyors of slavery. Christianity is the only worldview that has consistently gone away with slavery. Every other worldview before Christianity was fine with slavery.
Right.
Every single one of them. In fact, you look at the history of the world, when we talk about, look at America, it was built on the backs of slaves. I'm like, we realized before the mid-1800s that was literally the entire history
of humanity. Right.
And Christian abolitionists were the ones who really put the stomp on it.
Yeah.
And now it is used as a stock argument against us.
Right. Which, just the sheer irony of the whole thing is amazing. I think I was going to say something. Because prior to, not that Christianity's been around a long, long time at this point, there really wouldn't be any reason to say that something like slavery was wrong objectively in lieu of, some sort of moral law that was given by God, right, or the teachings of Christ. So that's kind of any other ideas that people have on either one of these, of just maybe a time that a non-Christian made a statement that was inconsistent with their view, or if not, we can move on to the next slide. It's no big deal. So I think we can all probably remember this moment in history. So Princess Diana and Mother Teresa actually died the same year. Funny enough, I do remember both of these events pretty keenly. I was only 8 years old when they happened, but the public reacted very differently to these two events, right? And particularly if we're looking at it from a godless perspective or an atheist or agnostic perspective, there really should be no difference between these two events. It was a death, right? So objectively, that's what happened. But to attribute significance to it is a whole nother thing. right? So from the atheistic perspective, no one would really die before their time because there is no ultimate purpose or plan or timetable, right? There's nothing to say that you should live a certain length of time. If there is no God, there is no trajectory to anything, then it just ended when it had to end, right? And there's really no reason why it ended, and there's also no reason for it to potentially continue to live, or life to continue going on. And especially if you take out things like morality even, or good and bad, why do we say that someone like Mother Teresa lived a good life or lived a full life? Anyone want to try that one? She was older, right. So now, would we say that Charles Manson lived a full life? He was pretty old when he died.
Okay, but they were both, generally good people.
Right.
But there was an age difference.
Charles Manson?
Right. So she had, there was a certain righteousness to her life, a goodness with Mother Teresa, and when that's coupled with the length of her life, and that she did all these good things. How she was out in India and witnessing to those out in India and providing these resources to them, and we look at that and say, wow, she did a really good thing, and she lived till she was like 90-something years old, and so we don't really have any conflict with that death. That's kind of how this world this is how it goes. We live in a fallen world, and death does exist. But since death exists, if we're going to live a full life, we want to live as long as we can and do as many good things in the process. Whereas with Princess Diana, what's the difference between Princess Diana and Mother Teresa?
Well, she was so young.
She was so young, right? Now, by all accounts, and some of you might have been a little bit more aware of maybe like Princess Diana's life. I'm not really aware of Princess Diana's life. I know that she kind of supported some humanitarian causes, but beyond that, I don't really know a whole lot. But I think she was generally well liked by the people at that time. You want to make any comment there, Paul, or?
Charles, people just don't really like him.
Well, because
so
of
I think
yeah.
it's mainly because she was seen almost as a darling right away.
Okay.
They made a very quick connection with the people themselves. Not that in a different way than, say, her mother-in-law did, Elizabeth.
Right.
She made that connection and kind of brought the palace down a little bit more closer to the ground.
Okay.
And Charles was just not liked. And to this day, is still
right. It's almost like she was a forerunner to almost like Kate Middleton, who was like a commoner, like even, right? Like where that's kind of where she was even more relatable.
There were a lot of parallels that were made there.
Interesting. Okay. So, but anyway, with Princess Diana, she died, at 36 years old in the car accident, and it was received as this major tragedy, right? And everyone's hearts were heavy. It wasn't like it was only the Christians that had heavy hearts over this event. The atheists, the agnostics, the polytheists, whatever. They all responded to this event with a sense of mourning and this deep sense of this is wrong. Something really bad happened. But of course, that wouldn't really make sense, if we're being consistent in our atheistic view that life has zero purpose, there is zero plan, then it's just the meaningless end to a meaningless life that, there's just nothing in there to mourn because there is no significance there. But of course, we did respond in the way that we did because we all know that life has meaning. She was understood as being a good person, and so yes, when you do good things, when you are at least perceived as a righteous person, it seems it's a loss that the world has endured. And so that's just kind of another example of the inside coming out. Any questions on that or comments?
I remember the set.
Yeah.
I remember everybody making a big deal about it. I couldn't figure out why.
I was similar, yeah. I was like, oh, okay.
A person died.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's.
As my mom, everyone's so sad. Like, why everyone's so sad? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, I knew death was like a sad thing, but I didn't know her at all, or that's kind of. And I remember Elton John,
It was like, it's over and
Yeah.
Still, honestly, like even when Elizabeth died and like all those things, people stayed up and watched.
Yeah.
Like even just not that long ago.
Right.
Just don't
I
forget
genuinely think they were waiting to see if Charles would burn into the ground that quickly. You can tell I'm not a big fan.
Stayed up all night or so, yeah, and watched that.
Yeah.
And I
It was
don't
ridiculous.
get it. Yeah.
Like, I had to look at pictures of it because I'm like, what is the big deal? And I had to look at pictures of it afterwards just to see what was I missing, and it was nothing.
The scandal of their
Or-
divorce was also huge. I
Yes.
mean, the fact that they were this was a royal couple.
Right.
That did not survive marriage. I think it was like the first time that it really happened.
Well, because who was it? Someone's brother. Was it the king's brother? Remember the King's Speech? You guys see that movie?
Elizabeth's father, right?
What's that?
Elizabeth's father, his brother was the one.
Yeah, but wasn't his life kind of riddled in scandal too, or
So he
something?
wanted to marry. I think she was a divorced woman, like she had been previously divorced,
Right.
and then that's when he got kicked out, and Elizabeth's father became king.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It was some
What even Princess Diana stuff? I feel like there's so many like theories as to whether that was
Contrived or. Wow. Just went in a different direction, yeah. All right, so how to use the inside-out tactics. So first we want to listen to when their words betray their true convictions about the world. Now, with some of these tactics, this kind of almost sounds harder than it is. Really, I think when we're talking to atheists and agnostics, which is really, in terms of like American culture, that is really the predominating view that's opposing Christianity at this point. If you live in certain areas like Dearborn, Michigan, where it's like Islam is everywhere, or you're out in like Utah and it's all Mormons, then this might change a little bit. But if we're talking more, explicitly about atheists, this really isn't that hard, because we just have to remember, if they make any kind of moral claim, if they try to, even imply that their life has significance or purpose, or that they have value or anything like that, they're betraying their own view. And so all you have to do is kind of have your ear out for that and just like ask a question about it. I'm like, well, that's kind of like the bottom one. In a world without purpose, why is Princess Diana's death a tragedy? Right? Because you can't get, a tragedy if it was pointless. So yeah, that's how you kind of exploit that tension. So just remember that those three steps. I'm going to ask you about it later in our little quiz, right? So first step is to listen for how their words betray their true convictions about the world. Secondly, exploit that tension by asking a question, and then that's just kind of like an example of a question that you can ask. A couple other ones that you can ask, like that we've kind of already gone over in this class a little bit. So if there is no ultimate universal morality, how can anything be really evil, right? That's kind of another question that you could ask someone. Or why try to talk someone out of suicide, right? This is kind of what the existentialists really realized at a certain point, was that if I live atheism out to the fullest, there is no difference between suicide and any other thing that you do with your life. In fact, suicide might even be favorable because you get to end all the bad things, right? So that's kind of a question that you could ask. Maybe if it's someone that you know a little bit and they're not going to go down a dark road, it's just kind of more of like a mental exercise with that. Obviously we don't want to encourage people to commit suicide, but that's more just showing the absurdity of it, right? It's kind of incorporating that reductio ad absurdum, or taking the roof off tactic along with the inside out tactic. So. Here's another concept that we all kind of know, right? Is that the world is broken and that we are broken along with it, right? And I think atheists will not often admit this outwardly, because I think they know that it doesn't fit within their view. You can't truly say that the world is, well, they do in a certain respect, and they do I think where they have trouble is with their own brokenness. With admitting that they are broken themselves, they don't admit that because, well, there's really no right and wrong, and it's all relative, and so how can I say that I'm really broken? But we all know that there are things that happen in the world that are painful, and it just shouldn't be this way, and just especially when we push it to the extreme, right? When someone loses a child, right? This is a major wrong. This should not happen in this world, right? if atheism's true, how can you make that statement? You can't say that this shouldn't happen. It's just what happened. And there is no should. And I think that's, again, if you ever find someone saying should, you got to ask them, where's that should coming from? What standard are you referring to in which the world should be different, right? Because in an atheistic world, the only world there is this one, and so there really couldn't be an alternative, right? But we all know that's not true, right? We know that something with the world has gone terribly wrong, right? And we all know that we, along with the world, are broken as well, right? And we hold on to these feelings of guilt, right? We might kind of try to cover over them and convince ourselves that it really wasn't all that bad, but deep down it's there, right? And it needs to be resolved somehow. And we have to answer for this, right? And so this is kind of, just another way to rephrase the problem of evil, right? That we recognize that the world is broken. And so, though humans have inherent dignity, we are also cruel, right? We know that yes, humans can be good, right? We have this capacity to be loving. We have this capacity to be relational and to boost other people up, but we also have this cruel side to us that can be extremely destructive. And it's not just out there, right? A lot of us want to, kind of make it like, evil is out there. It's those people that are evil, but not me. That's not biblical, and it's just not true, right? We all have this evil within us, and that needs to be addressed, right? And that's what Jesus did, right? Jesus addressed that problem within us. But if we don't admit that, then it's just kind of hanging out. And there's no resolution to it. It's this tension that just always exists within us that we don't know what to do with, right? And so deep inside us is a gnawing awareness of our own badness, which produces this guilt. And we're not, it's not like we're indebted to just an abstract law, which is some document, right? Anytime that we find this sense of guilt, it's always because we've offended a person, right? No one ever gets upset because they offended, I don't know, just something that doesn't really exist, right? We feel feelings of guilt when we've offended our mother, our father, our brother, our sister, our friends, or whoever it is. There's always a person on the other side of that, and the person that we've all wronged in an ultimate sense is God, right? So. And it's not good news because our guilt does have severe consequences. And again, this is just another thing that we all intuitively know deep down. Something I referred to last week is the end of life scenario, right? When we get to the end of life, we want that forgiveness. Because we all know we've done wrong things, and the question on our mind is not how much money did I make or something else that's trivial. It's always, did I do good in the world? Or can I be forgiven for this thing that I did? And they want to see that person that they've offended, right? And maybe that person's around, maybe they're not, and so they need to have that resolved because the only one that can resolve that is Jesus, right? In any kind of ultimate way. But I think that's just another very easy time to see the inside coming out is in those like final life moments there. So, okay, so everyone longs for justice is another one, right? We speak of it often, right? Especially when we've suffered injustice. This is something that is universal. It's not only Christians that are longing for justice. When we're wronged, we want to see that wrong exacted in some way. But of course, what this requires is there to be, a law that we are all beholden to, not just each individual person, because relativism would have it such that we all have our own little scales right within us. And so let's just say someone took $40,000 from me, right? Stole a lot of money from Mike, and I feel really wrong because I don't have a whole lot of money. So if you take $40,000 from me, that's going to really be a terrible thing for me. But of course, if everyone has their own scales, then and say you have a judge that has his own set of scales, and then you have the person that stole from you that has his own set of scales, and the judge is like, well, I'm kind of looking at all the scales around here, and this guy over here, yeah, you don't have a ton of money, Mike, but this guy has even less, and I really think that really should go to him, and so that's how we're going to do it, and that would be justice, right? Because the judge himself is saying that this is just, right? So in order to get a true justice, there has to be an absolute justice that both the judge and everyone else is referring to. And so this is, again, another example of the inside revealing itself on the outside, this idea that justice is something not just for me, not just for you, but for everyone. And the thing that, the tough thing, I think, about true justice is that it's not satisfied here. Not in the way that it needs to be, right? Because there's all sorts of injustices that happen all the time, right? Governmental justice is not God justice, right? There's people that we can all think of, politicians and otherwise that are corrupt, that get by with stuff because they unfortunately are the authority and they can let themselves off the hook if they want to, right? God doesn't do that though, right? And so we know that there will be a time when every wrong will all be before the judge, right? And those that have accepted the blood of Jesus will be forgiven and they'll be exonerated, right? But everyone that has not made that step, every wrong they've ever committed is going to be brought up, right? The books are open, and that they're going to be convicted of that, and they will receive their just due. And then Greg kind of puts it this way, is that this is Sagan's bottomless free fall, right? And mankind lost in a great darkness, right? That we don't know where we're going. We don't know. We have this longing for justice, this longing for good and badness to be exacted, and we want to have value in all of that, but we don't know where it is, and so there's just this lostness that we feel, right? If God's not there to guide the way. And the thing is that Sagan was wrong, right? Is that there is someone to send out a search party, right? God did send out a search party in Jesus, right? And so the answer to guilt is not denial, but forgiveness, right? The problem, though, is that if you accept that there is no God, you have to say it's not real. You'd have to say any guilt that you have is not true guilt, that it's just this figment of your imagination. It's just this idea of badness, not true badness, just something that you've kind of concocted in your own mind, or that the culture has concocted in the collective mind in some way. And so, but denial never solves it, right? I was kind of a functional atheist. Bye, Paul.
See you guys.
See ya. I certainly had a period where I was a bit of a functional atheist, and I would feel guilty about things, but I couldn't explain why, right? And it would never get resolved until, honestly, I would say it never got resolved until I finally accepted Christ, really, because that's how it actually does get resolved, is through forgiveness. You need forgiveness in order for guilt to essentially be released, right? And so, what else did I say? So Sagan's right when he says that we're lost, but he's wrong in saying that there's no one to send out a search party, right? So let's see, what else do I want to say here? I think it's basically all my notes are just basically saying the same thing. Yeah, we're good. Any questions on any of this so far? Kind of hitting you with a lot of information, but.
What would your response be though to someone who says, "Well, okay, I understand. God to have right and wrong.
Okay.
But if he's going to forgive you anyway, what does it matter?"
But if he's going to forgive you anyway, what does it matter? So if he's going to, are you...
So you're on your deathbed, and
right.
I've done whatever.
Right.
But I know that if I ask for forgiveness, he'll forgive me.
So...
What does it matter that I've done wrong? You know what I mean?
Right.
There's people that say...
I would ask them, is he really your Lord then? That's kind of where I typically go. If you're going to use his forgiveness licentiously to just essentially live a life of sin, is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right. Then because Christ tells us that the way that we become his friend is by following his commands. And if we're going to just kind of say, I don't really care about your commands, have you really accepted him as your Lord? Right. In order to receive his forgiveness, we also have to proclaim him as our Lord and Savior. So that one confused me for a long time too. Like when I was a new Christian, I was like, well, I can just continue doing what I used to do, and but that's kind of where I land with that.
I just didn't know if there's another tactic or way you get around that one. I get what you're saying.
Okay.
I just didn't know if there was another way that you're supposed to address that specifically.
That's the way that I usually do it. Because if we're just talking like. Yeah.
What we as Christians
believe. Are you saying is there kind of more of a secular way of saying that? I'd have to think about it. Just because I think in that situation they're already conceding that Jesus is the one that forgives, and so I think at that point you're free to use Jesus as since we're already saying that Jesus is the one that forgives, well, we'd also have to accept that he also is the one who said that in order to accept his forgiveness, we have to accept him as our Lord and Savior. And so I think you could bring that in at that point. I don't think you would necessarily have to make an appeal, because there really is no way to make a moral appeal to a secularist truly, because there is no morality in a godless world, ultimately. And because of that, there is no such thing as forgiveness, there is no such thing as sin, there's all of that is just kind of null and void. But, yeah. All right, let's see how much time we got. We're at 9:47, we still got plenty of time. So our restless souls, the restlessness of the human soul is universal human affliction, right? This isn't something that, again, I think for many of us, I think we've kind of probably been Christians our whole life, but this isn't just something that you guys feel. There is this kind of restlessness, amongst atheists, amongst all people. We have this. It's a common human affliction. And the two facts of the human condition lie at the heart of our own sense of longing, that we are broken and that it hasn't always been this way. Right? Do I talk about it here, or is it the next slide? I think, yeah, so I'm going to talk about the fact that it hasn't always been this way in the next slide. And this is something that atheism really cannot explain. We almost have this memory of a time, even though maybe not in this life, of a time when it was otherwise, when things weren't broken. Because, again, in order to say that something should be a different way, there must be some reference that we're talking about, right? And atheism really has no way to explain that, right? Because the only world that is the one that we're experiencing now, and certainly millions of years ago, if we're going from like their evolutionary perspective, it wasn't like it was any better when dinosaurs were eating everything on the earth. That certainly doesn't sound like a better existence. But Christianity, on the other hand, gives us an answer, right? So Augustine of Hippo says that you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they can find rest in you, right? And that's just the truth. You do not find that inner peace, that like abiding contentment, until you've come to rest on Christ. That is where that comes from. And just as someone who was searching for many years before I found it, I can tell you that's true. Yeah, good. So it hasn't always been this way. This is kind of like another kind of meaty subject that we can talk about a little bit. So there remains a remnant of our former beauty that the brokenness can't really destroy, right? We all have this kind of faint memory of before the fall, right? We know that was how it's supposed to be, that it's supposed to be like the Garden of Eden. Or heaven, right? That when everything gets restored, basically, and that's the way that's what we yearn for. We yearn for this sweetness that comes from knowing that there is no death, that there is no hunger, there's no pain, there's none of that. We really long for that, because that is the way it was supposed to. That was God's original plan, right? That was only destroyed by sin, right? And so when we look forward to heaven as this place where everything will be made anew again, and we will return to our former beauty, right? Got a lot of notes in here that are just basically saying the same thing. So atheism can't explain this. So atheism has to deny guilt, beauty, brokenness, and leaves us with nothing. I feel like there was something else I was going to say in here that had like some significance to it. I kind of already said all that. Okay, so Christianity gives us an answer. So C.S. Lewis says that if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world, right? And the world that the Bible describes is the one that we hunger for. And so we want to notice that how the truths that are built into us by God assert themselves, right? We know that there is this transcendent beauty, right? When we see a sunset, or when we see something beautiful, we recognize it as such because God has given us a beautiful thing. But if it's true that if atheism is true and there really is no such thing as purpose or anything, I mean, how can we say that something actually has transcendent beauty in any kind of meaningful way? And then certainly longing and hunger can be satisfied, right? This guilt that we feel can be healed, and then we can actually rise up from the fall, not by our own bootstraps, but through Jesus himself. He is the one that lifts us up out of there. Right? All right. Let's just kind of move into this. So, Inside Out in movies. So, the struggle to affirm human significance is a central theme in film. And so, this kind of idea of the triumph of the human spirit. And so, let's just kind of dwell upon this for a little while. Can we think of some movies in which we can see this idea of the triumph of the human spirit, or we see someone kind of rising over some great challenge, in which that really would not make sense in an atheistic view, right? There are views that kind of express that, like dystopian films that kind of try to demonstrate or indicate the cold hard truth that life is completely meaningless. But no one really watches those movies. I mean, you have critics that acclaim them, like, oh, look at this is just such a real film or whatever. But it's no one wants to watch that because I think they would say it's because we want to psych ourselves out. We want to escape from reality. I think that's kind of where they would. I would actually say we all know this to be true. We know that life does have meaning, and because of that, it is real. And so can we think of some movies really where it does show like the triumph of the human spirit? So that's kind of where I ask you to do it. That really doesn't belong from an atheistic view.
I think you can see it in a lot of like fantasy or typical like good versus evil. Like when you look at like the traditional hero arc, like the hero always goes through like really tough things, and there was no purpose. Like, why would you do that? Like, if you think of like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, or Star Wars, or whatever. Like, the hero always goes through something like really difficult. There's this perceived like in it. There's a good and an evil. Like, define good and evil in all those movies, and the hero always in the end like wins, and good triumphs over evil. And we all love those movies. Like in general, love like a good versus evil.
Right.
They always be really successful, and they last through generations.
Right.
There's that truth in it that we inherently know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think the good versus evil thing is there's so much in that because of course you don't get good or evil, from that's kind of the basic one that you don't get. But even the idea, even if you were to say that, okay, there is no good versus evil, this is just kind of like one group, kind of going against another, but what's the significance of that? There's really no point in having one group overcome another, so it's just, it just in every way, it kind of falls short of their own view, which would say that life is purposeless, and that there really is no value to one group versus another or whatever. Anyone got any other favorite movies that maybe shouldn't belong and that maybe atheists do enjoy that really has no business being in their view? Yeah.
Like if you think of even like the Marvel movies, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Even like the romance movies, it's not like good versus evil, but it's like the sort of the central female or male role that is struggling like in a romantic situation. They usually come out on top.
Right.
I think even there,
it's there.
The exception is, like you said, the dystopian or the horror genres.
Those would be the exception, and again, like no one watches them in any great number anyway. I think you're right. So the example that I had, and I think it was because this was when I was making this slide. This is what we were watching the Hunger Games, and I thought it really just kind of did show this in a very explicit way, because it showcases the triumph of marginal. Has anyone seen? Has everyone seen the Hunger Games Okay, so we've seen them, and so kind of the basic premise, right, is that we have these, well, I guess in the beginning it's 12 districts, right, but again later on you find out there's 13 or whatever, that there are these suppressed districts that the capital, like kind of that central government is kind of oppressing because of a revolt that had happened many, many years before, and no one from those districts are still alive from that time, except some. Was anyone still alive at that? Would anyone have still been alive from the original revolt? Probably not, right? Incredibly old, right? So you have this kind of government that's just causing them to live in squalor, and every year they have these games, right? These almost like gladiatorial games where they force children to compete against each other, and then of course the one who wins gets to live a life of luxury where they live in the capital, and so that's kind of them giving back. It's considered like the government giving back in some way to these oppressed districts, and so of course the whole story is how these districts overcome the government, and kind of their poster child or their leader is Katniss Everdeen, who's pictured there. And so kind of that distinction between good and evil is very much present, right? The evil ones are the tyrannical government, and of course the good ones are these districts that are trying to rise above it, right? And so of course you don't get good or evil from an atheist perspective. In fact, I think back to some of our conversations earlier about what would good be from an evolutionary perspective. The strongest, right? So the capital would be the good guys in that situation, right? And then the bad guys would be the districts that are trying to overcome it, because we have the weaker ones trying to usurp the oppressive government that has the strength, right? And so this actually would very much undercut their own evolutionary worldview. And then of course there's the whole meaningless problem, right? Because even if the capital government were to maintain control, or if the districts were to overcome, the government, it all doesn't matter anyway. So it's just it all lies flat, and it's honestly, I don't know how you're supposed to make a good movie out of from a truly atheistic perspective, because it's.
Well, now that you say, like you said about dystopian, were the exception, but this is a dystopian movie.
Yeah.
The whole premise that, like, the government has all of this tyrannical power and.
Sure. Yeah, it's.
Now that I think about it, I think most of the dystopian even have.
A somewhat.
Look into it, there's usually a hero.
Yeah, right. I think there's it's when you get into like those art movies, like some David Lynch movies are just like really just kind of dark, and they actually truly don't express any kind of light. It's just the dirt of humanity. Yeah, no, I don't recommend them because they're bleak. But they do exist there, and they tend to be not well known because again, they're not inspiring in any way, shape, or form, because they're speaking to a reality that I just don't think is real, or a version of reality that's not real, and.
Well, there is an exception. So like many years ago, did you ever watch The Boy in the Striped Pajamas?
No.
And it is the most horrific movie I've ever watched. It was good.
Okay.
But it was fictional, but it was based on like Nazis and concentration camps, and it was all told from the point that The Boy in the Striped Pajamas was actually a child.
I vaguely remember that now.
And it was. I mean, I don't regret watching it, but it was utterly awful.
Okay.
And it did not. I mean, there was because it was based on truth.
Right.
There was no good outcome. Like, I watched that movie and I felt awful.
Right.
But it wasn't good. I mean, it was a good movie.
To show you the horrors, I guess, of that time, right?
But there was no hero. There was no good outcome. It just.
Yeah, because I guess.
The movie stopped.
Right. It wasn't like the Allies. It wasn't like America came in and saved the child or something like that.
In that sense, like I think even an atheist would watch that and you just have this terrible feeling after it, like something is undone, like you just don't have closure to it.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that speaks to just people wanting to, like, having this sense of good and evil and what is right and wrong.
Right, and there is a purpose to overcoming that, and it's perceived as a good thing.
I can watch that and not feel awful after watching it.
Yeah. But I guess if you're being committed to your view as an atheist or agnostic, you'd have to say, well, this is just how it is, and there's nothing really wrong with that, which of course is absurd to us. Right? We hear that kind of language and we say, how can you say that? There's no purpose, or that this isn't actually bad, or that this is, we all know that it is bad.
Right.
Very good.
Like, seeing a movie like that then puts into perspective, like, that the sacrifice of, like, all the allies and, like, things on D-Day were, like, to overcome something bad, not for a good thing.
Right.
Because inherently we know that is evil, so, like, there was a purpose to the war.
To overcoming it.
And, yeah, because there was obviously a lot of death and destruction on the allies' side, of course, but, like, there was a purpose to overcome that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that can really, like, magnify that. Like, okay, well, this is what was going on.
Right, it's almost like we have to think in the back of our minds, like what eventually happened, with the war, and how they did overcome the evils that were causing these kinds of events, like this boy in the striped pajamas that was suffering in a concentration camp, to really appreciate that that it didn't end this way. Like, we all kind of fill in the blank. Like, we know that even though this unfortunately, this kid did, I'm assuming he died in the concentration camp. Is that kind of how that? Yeah.
Like, because it was from the point of view
Of
the Jewish people.
Yeah. So, which I guess, that's reality. But
Right.
again, if we're going to continue that reality to its, eventually they did destroy the Nazis and they, overcame it. But yeah, that's a tough one. Okay. I guess we'll end there. It's 10 o'clock, so covered some tough material today, but yeah. I guess I'll just pray our way out of here, and then we'll head on up to worship. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us into your house this morning, just to kind of go over the inside-out tactic a little further, just kind of looking how there's certain truths that we all know because you've imprinted it on our hearts, right? We are made in your image, and because of that, we know that there is a true morality, right? The morality that you put before us, right? The teachings that Christ gave us, and we also know that there is a solution to the problems of this world, right? That there is wrong, the world is broken, but you came to give us forgiveness and to save us from the brokenness of this world. And we know that one day justice will be enacted, right? We will all end up before you as the righteous judge, and those of us that have accepted you as God's Son, as the Savior who would take away our sins, that we will be cleansed of that unrighteousness. But other than that justice will be served. And just help us to continue to recognize when you're working in our lives, and when our hearts kind of know that the truths that you put before us are real and how they work themselves out in the outside world. And it's in Jesus' blessed name that we pray. Amen.